Time to take a look at the Warden updates by On MacMahal once again. Intro. Hello everyone, I'm On MacMahal and I'm here to start talking about the upcoming Warden class changes. The Warden is a challenging but rewarding class to play. Very, very true. Fundamentally structured around gambit skills which have almost no cooldown, gameplay is focused on maximizing the usage of masteries supported by a small number of standard skills. These allow you to rapidly build and execute a range of gambits while adapting as proactively as possible to changing gameplay circumstances. We want to maintain the Warden's focus on proactive gameplay and the gambit system, but we also want to make sure that the class is able to compete in the effectiveness with others in tanking and damage dealing roles. We're also presently planning on making the Assailment trait tree a non-specialization tree, but we'll cover that in more detail below. So basically, for those who don't know Warden currently the gameplay is get as many strong bleeds on the target as you can, and if you're fighting multiple targets, switch off the target before it dies so you can start applying bleeds to the next target. The Warden also has a really strong induction buff for their group, which kind of makes them feel like a support class in a way, as well as their mitigation javelin debuffs. But as we can see here at the last line, the Assailment trait tree will be a non-specialization tree, basically making yellow line, the Assailment line, into a utility tree, so you can either play a red Warden or blue Warden and pick some points into this, just like, for example, Minstrel. So, what is the current state of Warden? So what headwinds are Wardens currently facing? Arguably, the biggest issue facing Wardens is lack of defensive cooldown abilities for Determination Wardens. So Blue Line really has no real cooldowns except for Never Surrender and for the Free Peoples. Never Surrender is great, but only available infrequently. For the Free Peoples has a strong effect, but it has a lengthy ramp-up period, requiring you to use a lot of gambit builders, which you otherwise want to avoid, in lieu of mastery skills, as much as possible. That is true. Never Surrender is basically a skill that you passively apply, and it will save you from a death, but then it will go away. There's not really a reliable cooldown. For the Free Peoples, currently it takes way too long to build up to be considered a strong cooldown for a Warden, so there's really some work needed for Blue Warden. Gambit chains are an underutilized tool. This is true. Currently, the way you typically build your gambits is the opposite of chains. You start from the strongest and you work your way down. The idea behind chains is to start from the bottom and work your way up, but currently the bonuses from doing chains is not worth it at all. Since gambits have essentially no cooldown, the class has multiple features designed to promote the use of many gambits, rather than leaning on your strongest gambits indefinitely. So yeah, like I said, the design of the class is to promote the use of many gambits instead of using your strongest, but somewhere it kind of went wrong, and gameplay right now is to actually use your strongest right now. Gambit chains are one of these mechanisms, and in theory they are especially helpful at promoting the use of short 2-length and 3-length gambits. But the gambit chains which currently exist only affect a few specific gambit sequences, and 3 of those sequences are dot-based gambits, which already promote multi-skill usage. Since a single gambit's dot can only be applied on a target once, you're already likely to use as many different dot-applying gambits as you can before the oldest ones start to expire. We'll cover them in more detail below, but we want to make gambit chains a little more general, flexible, and meaningful in affecting your gambit sequences. So basically what he's saying here is the gameplay right now is applying all your dots, as many dots as you can, before starting to reapply them. That's the current gameplay of Warden. But the idea seems to be making the chains a little more valuable and mean something. For DPS Wardens, Seize the Moment looms too large over all class mechanics. This is true. Seize the Moment is a proc using your javelin skills that gives no cooldown on the mastery skills for 8 seconds. So a lot of the yellow Warden gameplay is proccing Seize the Moment and spam as many gambits as possible in that little time. and along with stronger marked and diminished debuffs, makes the moderately debuff-oriented assailment specialization capable of dealing more raw DPS than the recklessness specialization at high levels. This is also true. Yellow line Warden has stronger marked and diminished debuffs, bringing stronger debuffs for higher tiers, and of course Seize the Moment, also yellow line, makes yellow arguably the stronger specialization right now for Warden over red line. While we appreciate that Seize the Moment speeds up Warden gameplay, yes it does, part of the inherent design of mastery skills is that they are a resource limited by their cooldown times. Also true. Even without being locked behind Assailment, Seize the Moment removes so much of what limits a Warden that it makes the class feel much more feast or famine than it ought to. For these reasons, we intend to remove the Seize the Moment effect. It's the first time I've done a clap recording a video, but removing Seize the Moment, thank you very much. Its spirit will be retained in the new skill Rapid Techniques, as well as the trait Strong Foundations, which will make your Gambit builders reduce the active cooldowns of their related mastery skills. So the way I see this working is this last effect here, Gambit builders will reduce the active cooldowns. Basically, if you use so you have 3 Gambit builders, 1, 2, 3. So every time you would use Quick Thrust, which is the spear builder, it will then reduce the cooldown of every spear-oriented Gambit, such as this one, Spear and Shield, and Spear and Spear, and so on. Same thing for Warden's Taunt, which will be the Fist builder. It will then reduce the Fist, Fist and Shield, and so on. Every time you use one of these, it will reduce the cooldowns of the same family, so to speak. That's how I think it's going to work. Damage dealing Wardens also have a distinct lack of instant damage. While Wardens are capable of applying many dots effects to a single target, they suffer greatly in any situations with lower average mob health that don't give you much time to stack multiple dot effects. Now, this is also very true, especially in the Hidden Horde raid that we see now, when there's a lot of ad fights. Wardens are not as good as hunters or champions or burglars for burst damage. Instead, you just apply dots, a few dots to a target, move on to the next, a few dots there, move on to the next, and it requires the Warden to kind of work ahead of the group, which isn't, I wouldn't say it's especially good gameplay, so this is also a problem that needs fixing. While it isn't a major issue facing Wardens, the class also has a considerable amount of effect clutter. As much as possible, we'll be trimming this down in the forthcoming changes. Skills like Gambit builders don't need small stacking dots, and effects like the specialization bonuses, which give a 10% proc chance to apply minor buffs and debuffs, mostly end up cluttering the space below your vitals. Some of these effects will be consolidated into fewer, stronger buffs, while others will be removed outright. I think some of the clutter he means are like the 10% chance to apply on every of the builders, like the attack duration, range damage. All of these small little buffs are just a lot of clutter on Warden, and I agree, those should be removed. Alright, non-specialization assailment. You said assailment is becoming a non-specialization trait tree. The yellow line will be removed from being an active line. Instead, you'll play red or blue, and you'll get like bonus points into yellow for other stuff. Yes, like the recent change undergone by the Minstrel, the Warden's Assailment trait tree will become a passive, non-specialization trait tree. This means you won't be able to choose Assailment as your primary specialization, but you'll still be able to get plenty of bonus range damage, debuff effects, and utility out of the Assailment traits. Why remove the ability to specialize in Assailment? The Assailment specialization doesn't meaningfully impact your playstyle relative to specializing in the Recklessness tree, and the Warden at Ranged Identity doesn't require a full specialization, since any Warden can toggle the Assailment stance on. Most of what makes Assailment appealing right now are a few debuffs and effects which would actually benefit the Recklessness tree more if only they weren't locked up in the Assailment specialization. I believe he's talking about Stronger Marked and Diminished and Seize the Moment, stuff like that, which makes yellow OP right now. For those of you who prefer playing your Warden as a ranged damage class, you'll still be able to do so. You'll just choose Recklessness as your specialization, then prioritize ranged damage rates in the Recklessness tree. So, what are the goals for Warden? What are the goals? Wardens specializing in Determination, which is blue line, the tank line, should be able to stand side by side with Guardians, Captains, Brawlers, and other main tanks with confidence. In addition to your defensive gambits, you should have a few normal tanking skills bound by cooldowns rather than being gambits, which still interact with the gambit system. This should help you deal with the brief moments of significant spike damage like other meta tanks do, but without fundamentally altering your skill flow. So the goal for Blue Warden here is to give them more classic cooldowns, but still keeping it tied to the gambit system somehow. Wardens specializing in Recklessness, which is a red line for damage, should still be versatile damage dealers with a wide range of gambits for dealing with different situations. In a pinch, offensive Wardens should be able to line up some skills and gambits to deal meaningful instant damage during encounters, so basically burst damage. While damage over time effects should still be your most reliable and consistent damage, we don't want Wardens to feel completely shut out in encounters, with a greater emphasis on group of mobs that have smaller morale pools. Basically what he's saying here is Warden's main damage source will still be applying dots, but you should be better at dealing with large amount of mobs to be able to do more burst damage to, let's say, just lesser adds in a boss fight. Gambit effects should be cleaned up a little bit across the board. This will be covered in greater detail later on, but the general principle is that there are a lot of different gambits, so no individual gambit needs to have more than one or two effects. This extends to gambit sequences as well as the heuristics of which gambit builders lead to which effects. While there will still be some outliers, looking at you Dark Before Dawn, players should be able to reasonably infer associations between gambit builder sequences and their outputs, like spear gambits and instant damage, shield gambits and defensive bonuses, or fist gambits and dealing damage over time. So basically he's saying here that he wants there to be like a pattern, like spear gambits should be instant damage, shields should be defensive, and fists should be damage over time. Finally, a note about Wardens leveling up for the first time. We're planning to reinstate the leveling paradigm for Wardens, in which you start off with access to only 2 length gambits, later unlocking 3 length, then 4 length, and then 5 length gambits. This will have no impact on any Warden already over level 50, but hopefully help make learning the class a little more manageable for those stepping into it with little prior knowledge of the class or specific gambits. This is a smart move. If you look at my gambit panel in the middle, I have 5 available slots. Gambits go from 2, 3, 4 up to 5 length gambits. So basically, if you're a fresh Warden starting off, you will only have unlocked 2 of these windows, and then as you level up, it'll open then 3, and then a bit later 4, before finally giving you 5. So you won't feel overwhelmed while leveling a Warden. That's a really good idea. Next up, we have something called Gambit Chains and Advanced Technique. Gambit Chains. Gambit Chains will be staying with the class, but they will become a little bit more flexible. Completing a Gambit Chain will require using a 3 Gambit sequence, starting with a 2 length Gambit, followed by a 3 length Gambit, and then completed by subsequently using a 4 or 5 length Gambit. After beginning a gambit chain with a 2-length gambit, the following gambits in the chain will gain improved damage, healing, and buff durations. These gambits could be any of the gambits available to you, and they will no longer need to be part of a specific gambit sequence. That means you could use Persevere followed by Maddening Strike followed by Spear Virtue. Or you could use Warcry followed by Combination Strike followed by Warden's Triumph. In this last case, both Combination Strike and Warden's Triumph would benefit from the bonuses of being part of a gambit chain. And Warden's Triumph would also grant you 1 count of Advanced Technique. The only exception to this rule will be Potency Gambits, Death Strike, Defensive Strike, and Goad, but 1-1, 2-2, and 3-3, which will not count as beginning a gambit chain. Advanced Technique. Several new Warden skills will be normal skills bound by cooldowns, rather than gambit skills requiring builders. These skills will have short, strong effects and moderate cooldown times. However, rather than being freely available at full strength, their potency will be driven by Advanced Technique. Each skill will require at least 1 Advanced Technique, consume all of your Advanced Technique when used, and will become stronger with each additional Advanced Technique consumed when the skill fires. And how will you earn Advanced Technique? You'll receive 1 count every time you complete a gambit chain, up to 3 maximum, until they are either consumed by a skill or you leave combat. Basically how this is going to work, completing a gambit chain would give you 1 tick of Advanced Technique. So let's say I open with Precise Blow, which is a 2-length. I would then maybe do Power Attack, which is a 3-length. Then I would have to finish with a 3 or 4. So let's say I just do Spear Virtue. And doing this would now give me 1 Advanced Technique. And if you want to build more Advanced Techniques, you would then start with another chain. For example, Warcry, Piercing Strike, and Unerring Strike. For example, I would now have 2 Advanced Techniques, and if I do 1 more chain, I would have 3, which is the maximum, and then you could get the maximum effect of one of your cooldowns that require Advanced Technique. You could, of course, also cash out with 2 Advanced Techniques, but the cooldown wouldn't be as strong as with 3. Another thing that's worth noting is that the gambits used in a chain will also get a benefit extra boost, so we'll need to see more effects, how that affects. So let's say I do Warcry, then Piercing Strike. That would make Piercing Strike stronger somehow because it's part of a chain. If I were to finish with Unerring Strike, somehow this skill would be stronger because it's part of a chain. So there's 2 benefits to doing chains. The opener wouldn't get affected, so for example Warcry, but the next 2 gambits, so any 3 combination and then a 4 or 5, would get a buff somehow. I'm not exactly sure how, but they would get stronger. And you also build Advanced Technique. So there's a lot of variables in the Warden rotation now. A lot of things to think about, to test, so I can't wait for Bulwark to try out these rotations. And finally we have a summary. We hope this has been a helpful primer on some of our plans and goals for the upcoming Warden changes. A few core mechanics will change, augmenting the inherent power and flexibility of the Gambit system. We're excited to share more information with you soon, including a closer look at specific changes and some actual gameplay. Thanks for reading, and just like the Cappy post, we have a second forum post that will have more specific information later on. And once we get more information for Warden and Captain, I will of course be doing a video on those changes as well. Thank you for watching. Please consider subscribing to help out the channel, leave a like, join my Discord, and I'll see you in the next one. If you're playing or looking to play Lord of the Rings online, there is one place you need to be. The Ghynverse is a community Discord server for the game Lord of the Rings Online. In this server, you'll find anything from giveaways. There's also a frequently asked questions channel that I would recommend checking out first. You'll be able to see when I put out new YouTube videos, whenever I stream, You can also ask for the streamer role, and you'll be able to post your own streams in this server for everyone to see. There's currently over 5,000 members in this Discord, and it keeps growing. You will also find discussion channels about the game, LOTRO. You can ask any questions in the help channel. There's discussions for every single class in the game and PvP. But one of the best things about this server is the best in slot items section. In this section you can find trait lines for every single class. You will find screenshots of the current best gear being displayed. In this channel you'll find charts showing what stats you need for your characters, mitigations, mastery crit, finesse, but you'll also find useful information about drop rates in different instances. I hope you will consider joining my server, and maybe one day I'll see you in Middle Earth.